Travis Wayne Goodsell. Holy crap. Breaking news, and it's going to be a while before I get this up because I got to save the video I just did that was an hour long. Crap. Breaking news. Ali Velshi, filling in for Chris Hayes, just pointed out that Trump has sent troops, just like he did in Portland. He has sent troops to Kansas City, Missouri. Do you know how close that is to Independence, Missouri? Holy crap. So, holy crap. That's the place where Mormons understand, right? That's where we're going to have our kingdom restored, even though Joseph was actually saying Southern Illinois, and I didn't get into the, but I see my videos. Holy crap. Alright, Travis Wayne Goodsell. I've alluded to this video topic in a number of videos dealing with LDS church history, but have not gone into greater detail. And it's very likely that this will end up needing to be put as a further edit into the book I did, if I ever get around to doing an edit, if ever there is a time in our future that we'll be allowed to do so. It's about why the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does genealogy. Now, as missionaries, we went around talking about the one passage Yeah. 1 Corinthians 15:29. Else what shall they do which are baptized for the dead? If the dead rise not at all, why then are they baptized for the dead? And so we all assume in the church that, you know, doing baptisms for the dead and the temple work for them has to do with exalting them in the spirit world, making sure that all their work is done, and they then get to choose to accept their baptism and the temple ordinances. But it has nothing to do with any of that. Instead, it has to do with something else. It has to do with the Knights Templar and the Holy Grail. So let's get back to Matthew, chapter 1. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David. And then he goes into the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac, which is interesting for what we'll be talking about here, is that Abraham, according to Joseph Smith, lived in Egypt, not Babylon. And so to have Abraham sitting on the throne in facsimile number 3 with Pharaoh behind him, who's a female, and all Mormon Egyptologist apologists miss this or don't dare bring it up because of their ignorance on the whole topic, if they were to mention such a topic. Hatshepsut was the female pharaoh. During the 18th dynasty, which I've gone over numerous times, is the David-Moses dynasty. David-Moses is the English translation of the Hebrew, which is a transliteration from Egyptian. If you don't know what a transliteration is, it's taking a name from one language and carrying it over into another language straight across. Phonetically the same. Whereas Johann, for example, John, it's just pronounced differently because of the different languages. There's a slight phonetic similarity, but if you were to translate the Hebrew John or Johann, you'd have to take off the yo for Yah, but dove is the Hebrew word. So yes, John the Baptist, dove at Jesus' baptism, yeah, not a coincidence. But we're talking about genealogy. And so we have David. Who's David's son? Solomon. And again, I'll throw in some Paleo-Hebrew for you. The N at the end of persons or land is a determinative identifying whether they're a king or a kingdom. So Solomon, Salem, peace, with the N at the end as a person, king. King Solomon, king of peace. Oh, wait a minute. Isn't Jesus Christ the king of peace? Yeah. He's the son of David, Solomon. Not a coincidence. Jerusalem, in archaeological records, was Salem. So the kingdom of Salem. Kingdom of Solomon. The kingdom of Salem. Solomon. Kingdom of peace. They were not a kingdom over all the other in Canaan or Israel. They were always tributaries to mostly Egypt in the beginning, and then Assyria eventually came over and took over northern Egypt, or northern Canaan, and then Babylon then came in and took over the southern part of the land. But they've never been their own kingdom. They've always been tributaries. But this is where the concept comes from that we need to discuss first before we talk about genealogy. So now we can go back to Jesus, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David. Now, why is it important to have a son of David? It's to restore the kingdom. And so Abraham begetting Isaac is interesting because Abraham and Sarah. Sarah is incorrectly identified as the Hebrew word meaning princess, because Sarah is the wife of Abraham and is the new name of Sarai. Sarai becomes Sarah, and so for Sarai to become a princess, no, she becomes queen. And but the current expectation is that Sarah refers to princess in meaning, and that's not the case, because the house of Israel in Egypt, houses are referred to as the queen, and so house of Israel, the queen of Israel. The house of Abraham, the queen of Abraham, Sarah. And so Isaac becomes that king. And so David, the house of David, Bathsheba, according to the text. And let me see if I can do a Paleo-Hebrew thing for you some more. Again, computer program has Sarai identified as Sarah, so I'm going to skip down to where she's given the new name. There it is. So yeah, when she's told that she's now a mother, she's given the new name, Sarah. And so yeah, she mockingly laughs and thus calls her son mocking laughter. Yitzhak, Isaac. So Genesis 17:15. Letter Bible. Genesis 17. And go down to 15. Sarah, okay. Then Westminster, Leningrad. Yeah, it's the god of the waters, which is mother. The H at the end is dropped as a vowel. And so yeah, you have the S, which is a water symbol, and the R, which is an ensign flag symbol, which represents God. So it's God of the waters. And that would be Nun from Egyptian. Okay, so back again. And so if you understand the creation in Genesis, you have the waters in existence first. And the waters are divided, the dry land appears. Now this has multiple translations and interpretations that come from it. And one of those is human birth. Women have the water in the womb containing the baby, giving life to the baby in the womb, and creating the baby in the womb. And then the water bursts and the baby emerges from the womb as the firstborn birthright blessing the son, if it is a son. Otherwise it's a daughter, obviously. But this is where the concept of the firstborn, the birthright blessing son, is so important in the ancient cultures, is because it's a type and shadow symbolism of Jesus Christ, who's supposed to be Amen El. Very frustrating reading that, but Joseph is told by the angel Gabriel, you're supposed to name him Emmanuel. And then it says, the baby was born, and so Joseph named him Jesus. In direct violation of the angel Gabriel's commandment. But nonetheless, everybody thinks he's Jesus. The whole purpose of genealogy is for connecting Jews back to David, because the Jews are looking for a descendant of David. As Jeremiah chapter 23 verse 5, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will raise unto David. It's the genealogy of David, the descendants of David. A righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper, shall execute judgment and justice in the earth. This is the restoring Messiah, the Christ, because Christ is anointed, and so David, as anointed, being king, is a Christ. And so Mormons, under Joseph Smith, it was just washing and anointing. Brigham Young added the endowment ceremony. And so when Mormons are washed in the temple, they become high priests and high priestesses. When they're anointed, they become kings and queens. And the church has sort of lost that, as well as they've lost the purpose for genealogy. There's lots of things they've lost with the death of Joseph Smith. And so if you understand that you're looking for a man like Moses, because in his days, as Jeremiah continues, Judah, the Jews, shall be saved, and Israel shall dwell safely, and he will be called the Lord our righteousness, the Lord our high priest. Therefore, behold, the days come that they will no more say, the Lord liveth, which brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. That was Moses. That's who the Lord is that's being referred to here. Moses liveth, which brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. But a future man like Moses, a descendant of King David, who brings up and leads the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country and from all countries whither I have driven them, and they shall dwell in their own land. And so then we can go to, let's see, I think it's 16, in Doctrine and Covenants, section 103. He's talking about the 15th, for let's see, behold, I say unto you, the redemption of Zion must needs come by power. And I'm going to have to pause for a moment here, take care of some things. Alright. I can now resume unfettered. And so Joseph is saying the redemption of Zion needs to be done, and it will be done in the future. In 16, he says, therefore I will raise up a descendant, a person who is born as a mortal, unto my people. That's Mormons. Joseph Smith is saying, a Mormon, a male Mormon, a man, will be born in the future who will lead them, my people, like as Moses led the children of Israel. That's what he's referring to is Jeremiah chapter 23. He's talking about the Mormons being the fulfillment of this ancient prophecy. And it's not Jesus Christ who comes back from the clouds as a resurrected being, but a man who is born in the future. And I've gone over this on many different occasions, and so I hope I don't need to go over that again, because there's a lot of you who are like getting really stressed and insecure about your belief systems, as you've been led to believe Jesus Christ is the one you're waiting for. But the Jews are not looking for Jesus Christ to be resurrected and come back and finally save them. He was supposed to do it on earth, and he failed. That's why the Jews don't look for him. They're looking for another man to be born. There are specific prophecies that must be checked off on the list, and Jesus failed. And so when you understand that Joseph Smith is referring to the Gospels as prophecy, it should help Mormons, be a little more comfortable, but not always the case. And so, the Jews in Timothy. Okay. And verse 4. Paul is talking to Timothy, or writing a letter to Timothy, and at Ephesus, which is Macedonia. So that's more of Greek territory, and Roman by that time. But he's talking to him about neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies. It was the traditional practice to prove your lineage with genealogies. And so people would embellish their histories and genealogies to elevate themselves in society. And so that's what that's referring to. But the point is that they were all looking for the fulfillment to happen. Someone who would rise up to become the king of the world, restoring the kingdom of David. That bloodline, that holy Grail. And so we now skip ahead to the days when a pope of Europe. Well, we need to go back before that. The European royalty, as we do our genealogy in the church, we can't go beyond 1500. The church won't let us anymore. Before we could, and that was causing a lot of problems. The church hired experts of the European royalty, and they recommended that the church deny any Mormon from doing research, because they have figured it all out. And so, we're not allowed to go beyond 1500 in our genealogies. And if we do, we have to submit them. And if it's the royalties of England, forget about it. You're not going to be able to do it. You'll be denied, because it's all been done a billion times. And so the thing with the European royalty is that they all claimed succession from Jesus Christ, and thus from King David. And that's how they legitimized their reign on the throne of their various kingdoms, is because they believed that they had restored the kingdom of David. And the story goes is that Jesus and his wife Mary Magdalene had a child named Sarah, princess. Not accurate. She is a princess as a girl, but once she becomes the house of the royalty, she's supposed to be given a new name as queen, but they mess that up as they assume the Hebrew from the Bible of Abraham's wife. And so Sarah, as the princess, becomes the house for the kings and queens of Europe. And that's how the kings and queens claim legitimacy to the throne, is that they are the bloodlines from Jesus. Which then throws into conflict in regards to who Jesus was supposed to be, and eventually decided at listening to the news at the same time here. The police in Portland are gassing moms. But this was all part of the prophecy. Is that, no, I won't go into that. We're doing genealogy. And so when Jesus Christ was crucified, Mary Magdalene takes her daughter Sarah and flees into the European territory, and she becomes the family secret, as her life, the daughter's life, becomes most valuable and precious and needs to be protected at all costs to preserve the bloodline of Jesus for the prophecy of a future bloodline descent to rise up as a baby and restore the kingdom of Jesus, who failed, but then of King David, and thus the kings and queens of Europe. But yeah, they're in direct conflict with the Catholic Church, who claim that Jesus is not mortal at all, not even half mortal, and he's Trinity supernatural. And so yeah, there's been some conflicts there. You have a pope a millennia later who orders some men to go to Jerusalem and do some digging under the Temple of Solomon that has been destroyed. And they go there, they do digging, then they stop, and they immediately rush back to the Pope and tell the Pope something we don't know, because it was all in secret. The doors were sealed, and whatever was talked about was said in private. And whatever they had told the Pope granted them knighthood, and were granted to become wealthy by helping to provide passage, safety, and food, and all that to the temple of Christians who were on pilgrimages. And so they got the Knights Templar, the Knights of the Temple of Solomon, became extremely rich and wealthy because of what they found underneath the Temple of Solomon. And so time goes by, popes go by, the Knights Templar gets wealthier and wealthier, and then a future pope's a little upset and jealous. Doesn't like their wealth, doesn't like their power, doesn't like the people trusting them over him, because he's the Pope. And so he conspires with one of the kings, and Friday the 13th in October occurs, where they tried to round up all the Knights Templar and have them assassinated. But a number of them escaped, and there was a group that went to an island off Finland or Sweden, up in that area, and they then got passage on boat to the Americas. We know this because in Kensington, Minnesota, or Wisconsin. It's been so long since I was forced to memorize the states. It's next to the Dakotas. Map of USA. Okay, north and south, Minnesota. Yeah. And so in Kensington, Minnesota, there was a stone tablet that was written in rune, but they've identified Knights Templar alterations to the rune language. And it was confirmed because the method of dating was the Knights Templar method of dating. And 1363 is the dating on this stone. And it was a a transfer of ownership of land with the Mandan Indian tribe in the Dakota region. The land was to split in half right at that area, all the way down in what's now the United States, and the east was sold to the Knights Templar. And so you have the Knights Templar in one of the New Brunswick or Nova Scotia land masses in Canada, where the Knights Templar later came and built a well, and when people even later than that went down the well to see what was in the well, they found at one of the levels a note on, I believe it was stone, carved in stone, saying that beyond this point there is treasure. And so they tried to go below that point. It was booby-trapped, flooded with water. And so the concept of hidden treasure, hidden knowledge, because of what they did in southern Illinois, should be recognized by all Mormons, who have been finally told that Joseph Smith acquired seer stones, not a seer stone as the church has let loose as to confession, but he found them in a well that he was digging for Martin Harris when he was working for him before the Book of Mormon. But you'll notice that the Book of Mormon was buried in the ground and is treasure plates of knowledge in Egyptian. So part of the accusation of the Pope was that they were trusting too much in Egyptian, and Egyptian gods, and Egyptian stories, and Egyptian doctrines, and that was far away from Catholicism. And so that he also helped him justify Friday the 13th. And so in southern Illinois, there are caves, and in those caves there have been found attempts to replicate Egyptian records, as it's obvious that somebody who was not Egyptian, ancient Egyptian, was trying to copy Egyptian characters and figures, and so it was identified that the Knights Templar had buried their Egyptian treasure plates in those caves in southern Illinois. And so, yeah, Joseph Smith, Hill Cumorah, buried treasure plates, which contains the Book of Mormon, and he also talks about a cave filled with treasure plates in Egyptian writing as well. And so how does this tie in with the Knights Templar and the Smiths and the Book of Mormon and his seer stones? Well, that's what I've been telling you about church history. In Vermont, we know that Joseph Smith Sr. had become a member of the York Rites Freemasonry, because in 1800, when Hiram Smith was born, he named his son Hiram. Alvin, which was his firstborn son, is elf, having to do with elves. And that's a completely different concept than Freemasonry and even Jewish mysticism, which Joseph Smith Sr. was involved in while he was in Vermont with the New Israelites, which is a Congregationalist branch-off church. And that's where Joseph Smith learned Hebrew, Jewish mysticism with the Tree of Life, and the divining, which was from Justice Winchell, who joined the organization after 1800. But that's where Aaron had his Rod of Aaron, or not, Oliver Cowdery had his Rod of Aaron, which is called the Gift of Aaron in the Doctrine and Covenants. And part of the New Israelites was that they were descendants of the house of Israel, and that Hebrew was the angelic tongue, and plural marriage is involved, but Joseph Smith Sr. and William Cowdery never became members. You had to be members in order to be polygamous, and it's clear that Joseph Sr. was only interested in counterfeiting, which helps in the process of making plates to give to the print press and other things like that. And so as I have talked to you about William Morgan going to Joseph Smith Sr., that's where all that comes in, and I'm not going over that here. But in the York Rites, Freemasonry, they have in their ceremonies that are performed by the Master Mason, which is only the 3rd level, they have the highest level of the Knights Templar. So the ceremonies of the death of, or murder rather, of Hiram Abiff at the Temple of Solomon, and then everybody is involved in searching for the murderer, and they have the rituals based upon that. And you have the Temple of Solomon with the Knights Templar of the Temple of Solomon, and that's how they're connected, is that they're continuing the Knights Templar after they'd been disbanded by the Catholic Church. The Scottish Rites Masons are not affiliated with the Knights Templar. They've got their own rankings. That's the 33rd degree, which is the honorary degree, and 32 is the highest degree of the Scottish Rites. So it's completely different than the York Rites. But the first 3 levels to Master Mason is exactly the same in either Scottish Rite or in either lodge. And they held their meetings in temples. After the William Morgan incident, they had to call them something else other than temples, because everybody was anti-Mason at that time. And so, yeah, the Book of Mormon comes out of William Morgan, as it's believed to have been found buried in the hill Cumorah, and Joseph talks about a cave filled with other plates at the hill Cumorah as well. And I've gone over how the hill Cumorah is southern Illinois that they're referring to. Another thing that the New Israelites taught Joseph Sr. was astronomy. There was Jewish mystical version of astronomy, which is not astrology. The Holiness to the Lord parchment is part of that. It's an astronomy chart, and so Joseph Smith Sr. was involved in identifying the signs in the heavens, and so the church then has a lot to do with all of this background, as Joseph Smith was being raised up by Joseph Smith Sr. to be the bloodline Holy Grail, Messiah, Christ, descendant of King David, to restore the kingdom of David in the New Jerusalem. See how that works? And so, unfortunately, Joseph Smith was murdered. But as I read to you, Joseph Smith said that another future Mormon would rise up and do what Joseph Smith did, which means that the church had to fall into apostasy with his murder. I think that is about it. I mean, sangria, blood royal, refers to the Jewish king's blood, King David, and thus the lineage of King David. So the search or the quest for the Holy Grail of King Arthur and his knights with Camelot, that was all symbolic of the kingdom of David, which then was conquered, and then they had to go on the search for the Holy Grail, which was the bloodline for the future who would restore Camelot. So the Canterbury Tales are awesome when you understand the interpretation of the whole texts. Yeah, it's a completely different religion than what we've currently been led to believe it is. As baptisms are for the dead are supposed to be for our direct ancestors, tracing them back to King David, as baptism is a symbolic thing rather than a necessary function in order to get to the highest degree of the celestial kingdom. It's more of a symbolic recreation of the original Hiram Abiff, who was assassinated, which, as the Knights Templar understood it, and then thus the Freemasons, that it goes back to the Egyptians, with Osiris being murdered by his brother, and then Horus, the son, having to do battle with his uncle, and all these different contests being judged to finally win and take back the throne of his father and restoring it. And thus, many of the signs in the heavens come from the Egyptians, therefore. The two eyes of Horus, at the beginning of the battle, his eyes are taken out, and he is blinded. And so Samson, the Sun King, as I've talked about before, the N at the end, King, Shemesh, Sun King. And Isaac is blinded, the son of Abraham, blinded, but it's instead for his son, Jacob, the usurper, who's taking away the birthright and the blessing of Esau, the hairy one. And so that's an interesting twist, as Isaac is the son and the father at one time, according to that. There is something very interesting in Wikipedia about Jesus' bloodline concerning Mormonism. Early Mormon theology, as I'm reading here, early Mormon theology, posited not only that Jesus was married, but that he did so multiple times. He was a polygamist. The early Brighamite church leaders, Jedediah M. Grant, Orson Hyde, Joseph F. Smith, Orson Pratt, and I don't know why they didn't put Brigham Young, but they referred to an apocryphal passage attributed to a 2nd century Greek philosopher, Celsus. And that text refers to many wives being given to demons, And that's a little bit disturbing that the Brighamite Mormons would use that to justify it. But something else they haven't been telling us. As we read in the Book of Mormon, the Great and Abominable Church, which was founded by the devil, thus his followers are demons, and one of the things that this Great and Abominable Church loves to do is have many harlots. And so, yeah, polygamy is part of the Great and Abominable Church, and thus of demons. So that's a disturbing connection that I found. But some other stuff unrelated, but Origen, however you pronounce it. I think it would be Origen if my Latin teacher were to listen to me. Whip me with his ruler for not pronouncing it correctly. But he talked about how these polygamists in the Christian church, followers of Celsus, would go off into the desert, and he's obviously referring to Matthew chapter 24, where it says if someone were to come to you and say that God is in the desert, don't follow him. So what does Brigham Young do? He goes into the desert, and Mormons follow him. And so, that's what's supposed to be done with our genealogy. It has nothing to do with putting in our adoptive parents, our foster parents, or anything like that. We're actually supposed to trace our biological sexual parents, because that's what gen is translated. It has to do with the sexual union of a man and a woman having offspring. And so it's the genealogy is the study of the sexual descent or ascent, whichever way you go back and forth. So it'd be ascent if it's going back in time. Yeah, we don't think of that either, as the church is confused about gay rights being allowed to adopt children. So the church abandons their adoption agency because they don't want to get involved in having to give gay couples Mormon children who were born out of either rape or prematurely as teenagers, as the church forces the woman to have the baby and then give it up. So, no real concern there, but that should give you a background on why Joseph Smith was into genealogy, and the purpose of that is that Elijah, if you understand the Jewish concept of Passover, which comes from Moses, and the Passover with the coronavirus, then you realize, hey, wait a minute, we've been having signs in the heavens. Hey, wait a minute, we have a coronavirus. Hey, wait a minute, our financial burdens have increased under our current leader who's established martial law, and I believe I heard he was going to go into New Mexico and Chicago to expand, because nobody's stopping him. So, yeah, that gives you a little understanding of what Joseph Smith intended with the Holy Grail.